Yes, welcome. So we decided to change it up just a little bit, as you can see by our beautiful plant decor that I borrowed from the bar downstairs. We are going into podcast mode. So we're gonna change up our panel a little bit and have a little bit less presenty and a little bit more discussion. So as you're listening to the beginning, please start thinking up questions or discussion points that you'd like to pose to the panel. So today's, I guess I'll start out with a couple of questions. So who here is working in operations or operational planning? Any hands? Any hands? Oh, we got a couple, we've got a few. I know in the digital water space, we're still kind of getting there with bringing operations into the discussion on a broader level. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. And who has tried implementing a SMART project or a technology project at their utility or company? And who has worked in a cross-departmental project? Oh, we got a few more hands. Now, what was that experience like? I'm sure it went very smoothly and there were no challenges. And everyone communicated and got on super well. Well, there are three main elements to optimization when we're looking at an optimization problem. There's the objective, there's the variables, and then there's the constraints. So what we're talking about today is an objective where we're looking at operational variables to try to optimize utility for more sustainable operations. And that's really what the projects that we're talking about are trying to achieve today. So we've invited our three experts here to talk about their experience in the space. So before we jump into the discussion too much, I wanted to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and the perspective that they're approaching these problems from, as well as their top takeaways. So we're starting from the back a little bit. Their top takeaways for this type of optimization project, where they're looking at cross-departmental nexus issues, where they're bringing in a lot of different opinions, priorities, perspectives to try to achieve a singular goal. And so I'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll start with Lacey Carruthers, who's a Director of Engineering at California American Water. Go.
I might sit up here just so I can see.
Yeah.
Don't take my...
Give everyone a little wake-up call.
I'm gonna try and see my slides over there. So I'm Lacey Carruthers, Director of Engineering for California American Water, and the project, I guess, about optimization and sustainability that we've been working on is we've been implementing battery energy storage systems. Has anyone heard of like microgrids or batteries? Okay, good, a lot of people. So our utility perspective it's about resiliency. I think most people have heard about the fires in California that are going on right now. This isn't new to us. Back in 2017, one of our systems, like half of it burnt down from a wildland fire. So when all these wildland fires, they've gotten like a lot worse over the years. They weren't this bad, 20 years ago. And the electric utilities, were taking blame for them. And they started introducing these public safety power shutoffs in order to hopefully prevent these really destructive wildland fires. And that included conversations with us, a water utility, and they were telling us that, we could give you a 30-minute warning and shut the power down for 4 hours to 72 hours. And, as a water utility, I don't know, well, I guess as a, resident of California, I lose my power. And I don't know in Arizona, where everyone's from, if they lose their power a lot. But I don't know, has anyone lost their power? Okay, one person. Wow, you guys are really lucky. Well, I will tell you, it is so irritating and annoying. I have 3 little kids, and it drives me nuts. I'm like, in this day and age, we should not lose our power. But then there's like a bit of like nostalgia to it because we're all sitting at the dinner table, you know, under a little candlelight, and we're actually talking to each other, and we're playing cards, and you're like, you know, maybe I should like slow down and have more of these moments and not, you know, get caught up. So there's, you know, this bit of like, okay, maybe the power outage wasn't so bad. But can you imagine if we couldn't flush our toilets in that house? No, as a water utility, we have to provide water and wastewater services 24/7. There's no, it's an inconvenience that your water goes out or your wastewater goes out. It just can't happen. So we have to be resilient, and we have to be able to continue to provide water if we don't have power. That's kind of where these projects stemmed from. And so I would say like the key considerations that we took into account was like, what problem are we solving? If you're not solving a problem, then why are you doing a project? And for us, that problem was PSPS events. And we do have backup diesel generators, and those exist. But you know, we just asked, is there a better way of doing this? Is there new technology? And with the PSPS events for the electric utilities, our California Public Utilities Commission opened up this, they call it SGIP funding, Self-Generation Improvement Program. And so we're able to get funding in order to put batteries out at site. So we really took advantage of, I guess, funding that was already out there in order to help us be more resilient. So the second part is access to funding. You know, I don't know if it would have been cost benefit worth it, or like a business case for it if we hadn't have gotten funding. And we've deployed 2 of those SGIP projects. We have a 3rd one coming online next year. And during this time, the California Water Association, which we're a part of, and Generac teamed up together and asked all the utilities and CWA if we'd be interested in doing a joint grant for DOE GRIP funding for these microgrids and battery energy storage systems. And they were just awarded $100 million, and it was $50 million, but 1-for-1 match in DOE GRIP funding. Did I take my time? So anyway, there's a lot of community benefits from this funding that we received. You know, grid benefits. When it's not a power outage, we can still use the batteries and run off them during peak price of the electric utility. So we're always buying energy at the lowest rate. This also helps grid stability. There's a lot of times where the grid will ask, say like, you know, it's an extreme heat day, can you shed load? We can't shed load because people are taking showers, people are washing dishes, so we can use the batteries. And you know, there's environmental benefits that helps us meet our greenhouse gas emissions. And part of this DOE GRIP funding, there was a lot of community engagement, labor engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion. So these projects are going to be put in disadvantaged communities. I think there's like a percentage, like over 50% need to be in disadvantaged communities. We're hiring 100% union labor to do them. There's a supplier diversity aspect where the construction and the design will be done by diverse suppliers. And there's also grants and internships that will be created to help those disadvantaged communities maybe get some job skills there.
Thank you so much. All right. So, super interested to discuss a little bit more about what that process was like. And next, we will have Rob come up and introduce himself, his perspective on these types of multi-stakeholder nexus issues and the projects that he worked on.
You flip for me? We can stay on this one. Great. So my name's Rob Putman. I work with a company known as ABB in our process automation business area. My primary focus in ABB is the security tools and securitization of process automation systems. In the name of optimization and sustainability, I've got a couple of use cases. Actually, I've got 3 things I want to share with you today. Number one is my superpower, which you'll understand why that's important at the end of the presentation. Number two, a couple of pretty cool use cases that my company was involved in and the kind of impact that we were able to have with a couple of wastewater organizations. And number three is probably the most ominous. I've found a security issue here at the hotel. I'm a security guy, I can't help myself. I like to break things. So I did a little bit of a spelunking, and I'll share my findings with you at the end of the presentation. It involves a car. So if any of you have a rental car, anybody? I do. So my perspective on cybersecurity and systems in general is you've always got to work from a good design or a reference architecture. And so anytime you're looking at any sort of engineering engagement or project, I'm always thinking through, what are we trying to accomplish? Where does it fit into an existing design, or is it a new unit or a new build that we're doing? And of course it cascades out into the security implications around it. Something I learned a long time ago in my career is that security is a design element. You got to think about it up front. And if you don't, you're going to be chasing yourself down the road. So I did I don't know if it's funny or not, but a little red line that says start here. Start with your reference architecture. It's the design document that describes what you're trying to do, what's important, and how you need to think about security. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So just a couple of use cases here, case studies. One is Schwarzenbruck in Germany. This one's particularly interesting to me because it combines cybersecurity, it combines, or it has sustainability and optimization of operations. Schwarzenbruck aspired to go off of the local grid. They wanted to source all of their electricity locally. And they also wanted to optimize some of their operations relative to their use of chemicals in their process. Not a sales pitch, but my company went in there, looked at the project, and helped them out. And one of the outcomes was that they were able to source, number one, they were able to meet their goal of getting off the grid. So a combination of solar, persistence locally through storage, generation, and use of off-gassing in their process in order to generate electricity. So that's interesting, but what's more interesting was the dynamic allocation or utilization of that energy based on different conditions. So it allowed them to optimize their use of energy across multiple sources within their environment. And then the other added benefit that came with that, with the control system and optimization there, was the ability to more efficiently use chemicals and reduce their impact on the environment. That's a pretty cool one. The other one I'm aware of, and is there anyone here from San Jose, Santa Clara? Cool. We worked with you guys in particular in the area of cybersecurity, but it was also related to process automation system upgrade. What I liked about this one wasn't that they added a few of our cybersecurity controls, and I'd love to connect with you later and find out how that's going for you. But it really required looking at the system, the deployment of the new units, the configuration, et cetera, holistically from the standpoint of a reference architecture. Just a good approach to security. Do you ever get it 100% right? Probably not. But you want to take a lot of low-hanging fruit off of the table so that attackers don't have easy access. Which leads me to my close. So I was going to tie it all together in this, but I think it's more important to address the security issue that I found. So one of our mandates, and I've got a picture, I've got evidence too. So the evidence is this. There's a 2024 Honda Civic, black, with California license plate 9JNS 879, and it's on floor B1, slot 172. So in my spelunking around, I can't help myself. I like to find problems. I like to break things. I discovered that the keys are in this car. And it's a rental car. It's a Hertz rental car. And the rental agreement was in the car too. So I guess there was some information on the rental agreement. Out of respect to everyone here in the room, I chose not to try to drive it out or drive it around and add miles, things like that, mostly because I'm cheap. I didn't want to pay the parking exit toll. So why do I bring this up? I bring it up because Throughout my career, I've found the topic of cybersecurity to be somewhat inaccessible for people. You're either kind of in the team and thinking about these things, and it gets interesting, deeply technical, reliant and dependent on data. It's a really fun space if you work in it. It's also very inaccessible. It's difficult to explain the value and purpose of securing these environments up to the C-suite or the business leadership. And so I always look for opportunities to translate or explain that many times everyone in the room can have a role in cybersecurity. I had a senior consultant explain to me a long time ago, look, it's just not that hard. A lot of times you're just looking for what must always work and what must never happen. And if you don't have a security background and you come at it from that perspective, you can begin to have conversations, you can peel the onion back and understand all of the implications cascaded out into the business, societal risk, your mission to your community, and the people you serve. So that's why I brought up this example. Coincidentally, and I just realized this, coincidentally, the name on the Hertz rental is Robert Putman. If anybody, I'm kidding. No, but it can be that easy. So similar in a water or wastewater facility, you have to understand attackers are doing reconnaissance. They're using a multitude of levels of sophistication, tools, physical security, analysis of your site, how people work, what they're doing. They're incredibly clever. In fact, I think the story of cybersecurity and tricking each other into doing things or getting access to information is as old as civilization. But it can be that easy. You can imagine, had I left my keys, who would ever leave their keys in their car? Well, who would ever do an analog to leaving your keys in your car in the security posture of your environment? So you don't need to be a deep technical expert. You just need to be able to ask these sort of what-if questions. What must always work? Is it always going to work? What must never happen? Well, what happens if that what must never happen happens? So I just want to encourage all of you that it is an accessible topic. You should all be deeply skeptical about how things work. And then if you're like me, figure out how it could break and what horrible things could possibly go wrong. But that's my superpower. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. And our final panelist, we have Tacoma Zach, who's the CEO at Mentor APM, and he'll introduce himself and the perspective that he's coming at optimization from, and a little bit about some of the projects that he'll be sharing today.
I'll take the controller.
All right.
There's a bunch of blurby stuff up there about myself, and the reason why it's up there, there's only two things I really wanted to highlight about that. One is I spent most of my career at Veolia, running water, wastewater facilities and industrial facilities, and the last thing I did there was run the business for them in the West, and then got into asset management in earnest, because that's something we were doing back in the early 2000s, so got into the software business and asset management and sit on a committee for ISO 55000 changes, et cetera. So broad spectrum of interest, so the perspective of optimization for me naturally comes through the lens of managing assets a particular way, but in the larger context of asset management. So that's some of the stuff that we look at for any kind of project to optimize, whether it's a specific thing or if it's plant optimizations to look at what the plant's really supposed to do, or if it's a particular initiative on energy, et cetera. Whatever it ends up being, it always needs to sort of come through the lens of asset management at the beginning. This is a little bit hard to read, I guess, from this side. So, right. So I said the first point about it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about two particular projects, since others are talking about projects as well. So I'm going to go coast to coast. So one is Santa Monica, and we all are aware of Santa Monica's right in that region that right now has just gone through a very, very, very difficult time with the fires. In fact, we were checking in with our customer there, and fortunately everybody on the utility side is safe, but they were working feverishly just to make sure that they had enough water in the system at pressure for Santa Monica, because it had an evacuation order as well. And what's unique about those guys is that they had a one water goal. And to do that, they selected some innovative technologies in order to facilitate that. And one of the coolest things that they're doing is they're taking stormwater runoff, urban, ordinary, average, everyday runoff, as well as wastewater. And they're treating it, membrane technologies, a unique membrane technology, actually. It's reverse flow ROs, and doing aquifer injection. And they're really trying to become much more self-sufficient towards their one water goal. A lot of really cool moving parts, and one of the things that they did, though, is they recognized we need to maintain these, we need to manage these assets in order to keep the system running at peak performance so that we can actually achieve that goal. So their sort of corporate optimization is being guided a little bit by what is guiding how they're going to be looking after the assets. So they picked some, unique assets that are a little bit more complicated, and therefore they also needed certain technology, certain information about their assets so that they can actually engage in an asset management program, so they can make the right decisions of when do we maintain, what can we let go, when do we need to refurbish, that kind of stuff. Part of that is echoed completely the other side of the continent in Washington, D.C. at Alex Renew, another one of our customers, and their engagement is they asked us to do a risk assessment, a criticality and risk assessment, because their objectives are capital planning. They're not engaged in a one water project, they're in a Renew project. They're trying to abate stormwater runoff going into the river, and they're really trying to have a water quality improvement in their local environment as a key driver. So they're putting infrastructure in place as well, and they recognize they want to start that infrastructure off the right way, but they need to optimize their plant. And to start optimizing their plant, they recognize we need to understand what are the most important things in this facility. And then when you ask that question, you should automatically ask the question, well, wait a minute, what do the stakeholders say about this stuff? What is the reason that these assets actually exist? There's a charter. There's an initial charter back in the 50s as to why the plant was even built in the first place. There's a minimum level of service that must be maintained. And minimum isn't, oh, this is what we can get away with. Minimum is aspirational. Minimum is like, this is what we must always meet. And those of you who are water purveyors, you guys who sell water, my good friend Dave Topman told me this the other day. He goes, you're not selling water, you're selling pressure and rate. The quality is sort of automatic, but when people turn on a tap, when those fire hydrants were supposed to be opened, what they expected was a particular pressure and a rate of water that was sustained so that they could actually do what it was intended. And so whether it's a wastewater plant that is intended to clean, or if it's a water plant that's intended to deliver potable water, or whatever the water is that you're being tasked with, we honestly believe it really needs to come through the lens of managing those assets in a particular way. So when you look at the charter, when you look at that level of service, when you look at what the ratepayers and the stakeholders mean or ask for, that's when you can begin to optimize the operation and optimize the plant stuff. Because when you're looking at saying, well, we want to do an energy balance, we want to do more energy stuff, great. Is that really that important? What's the cost of that going to be? Does that actually move the needle as far as what our primary objectives are? Does the mayor care? Do the ratepayers care? That kind of stuff. So that's why we start looking at these things and start going through, and the customers are looking at saying, not just for capital planning, what do we need to fix to live up to what our mandates are, but also with specific goals like a one water goal, which is way at the other end of the extreme. They end up looking through these things through the lens of asset management. So what we really try to encourage our customers to do at the end of the day is understand to do the right thing to those assets at the right time to get that right result. Now you asked about, have I got one more second?
Sure, but I'd like to move on to the discussion.
Yeah. So I'm going to, well then, you know what, let's just do that and I can go ahead and talk about these things afterwards.
Yeah, that sounds good. If you want to rejoin. All right, so thank you. So as you heard, we have quite a variety of perspectives and different projects. We're looking in the energy optimization space, the energy optimization and cybersecurity, and chemical optimization space, and then the asset management optimization space. So this is a lot of different looks at the same types of projects. So we wanted to have a bit of a discussion where we talk best practices, where we talk challenges, so that as you're trying to implement these types of projects within your utilities, within your organizations, you have a better understanding of where to get started, how to move forward if you're at an impasse, or what are the things to consider as you're researching it, or even as you're wrapping things up, what to look back on. So like I said, if you do have questions, please throw your hand up throughout. This is much more discussion format. But I will start the discussion off and just ask my panelists, what were some of the big challenges as you were going through this process? And you can use specific examples from the projects, but what were some of the biggest, either anticipated or unanticipated challenges that you had to overcome to get this project either started or keep it moving as you move through these multi-stakeholder initiatives?
So getting everybody into the same room, working through people's schedules and getting them to adopt a new way of thinking about their facility and their operations. And that broke down into two things: change management and getting the different departments represented in the same room. So for change management, we did an education program to get them to understand what asset management really was at an accessible level. And it isn't rocket science. It's actually really, really fundamental and easy. We do it on our own lives all the time. And then the second thing was getting all the different departments into the same room to talk about the same issues of when things broke, what were the consequences? How significant was this? It did something that it provided cross-pollination, and it provided an understanding of what the other people's priorities were, and everybody started sort of putting the oars in the water at the same time, going in the same direction. But managing their schedules was difficult.
Okay.
Similar to what he said, I think proof of value is what's coming to mind for me. So whether it's cybersecurity or a larger project where cybersecurity is a core component, really being able to take the time and understand the needs of the business, the goals and objectives of the business, and map that to the work that you're going to do and what you're actually going to deliver. Sometimes I've seen organizations take that to the level of sort of contract-driven outcomes or outcome-driven value, meaning they don't make any money unless you realize your goals, cost savings or top-line revenue. And it's important, and it's also really challenging. And the thing I like about my role, at least now, I call myself a mile wide and an inch deep, because at ABB I get to look at all these different markets and how they're applying process automation to the bidding of the business. And it's very different, and part of why I like coming to conferences like this is I get to hear what you actually care about, what your problems are, what your priorities are. So really, I'm going to just say mapping it to the value that the business expects to receive. You got to do it. It's hard, and you got to work with a lot of folks to get it over the line.
Yeah, so our project was pretty straightforward in that sense. It didn't take a lot of convincing or buy-in. Everyone was bought in. We were getting grant funding for it, and it provided backup storage, which operations wanted, everyone wanted, and resiliency. What we found more was the SCHIP funding had very strict, I guess, definitions of, vendors and suppliers we could use, and then there were only certain vendors were qualified, and then it was new technology that hadn't been rolled out a lot, so some of those vendors went, kind of left the scene when we had contracted with them. So I'm hoping that as we've done a few projects and we've got this big grant funding now, and more people are starting to look at these battery energy storage systems, that those problems will be alleviated.
All right. Thank you. So I'm really interested, Robert, you mentioned with cybersecurity, sort of the fundamental is what must always happen and what absolutely can't happen. And what that really sounds like to me is those are like when we're talking in the optimization space, those are like the main constraints. We talked about the variables, we talked about the objective, but those are kind of like the core constraints. So I'm actually interested from Lacey's perspective, just to keep everyone on their toes. What were those must absolutely happen and can't ever happen when you were in the early stages of discussing this microgrid program? Because it is very different from the way that utilities operate now. So what was that discussion like at the beginning?
Well,
did it evolve?
Well, there was a big concern with the risk of PSPS events and losing power and not knowing if it was going to be 4 hours or 72 hours. As I said, we do have backup diesel generators, but they only last, you got to go refill them. And with grant funding, this added extra opportunity to put in another system that would add for resiliency.
Okay. I'll throw it out to the audience. Any questions for the panel so far? I got lots more. I can keep going, but I wanted to see if anyone's got some curiosity. Well, we have one.
Okay, so we're talking a lot about leading edge technology, and we're applying that mostly in the water space on what I would call ancient edge technology, right? Like our sensors, our PLCs, sometimes even our communication platforms. So what are you guys doing to help prepare utilities to be able to take advantage of this leading edge technology in the most secure way on top of maybe some older infrastructure?
Sure. What are we guys doing? Okay, so I'm going to, I guess, put my ABB hat on here. So the way we, and the question was oriented towards security, right? Yeah, yeah. Yep, yep. So I'll go back to what I said earlier. It all starts with design, right? So if you don't consider security as part of design, and at least at ABB and many other organizations that I'm aware of, security is a design requirement. It's in your software development lifecycle, it's in your hardware and firmware procurement. There's room to improve there. One of the topics that is afoot right now, and it's a bit devilish, is the software bill of materials. And I'm not going to take it all the way to the level of chain of custody, but how do you trust that all of the components of that system or node are secure and haven't been corrupted? I think we know of examples in the networking space where corrupt software, firmware was introduced into production and distributed, and everybody got a corrupt network device. So there's the design phase. There's also the implementation stage, and I often see that has some of the strongest benefit, whether it be the intentional segmentation and routing of your traffic. I call it the defender's advantage in a lot of these places, or at least in automation control environments, because they're supposed to work very specific ways. There's very specific communication and routing that should be occurring, and you can monitor for that. It's not like, it's not like WhatsApp should be showing up on an engineering workstation and trying to communicate outbound from the environment. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So secure deployment. And then in addition to that, there are the basic security tools or controls that you can add to the environment. Not every OEM is going to deliver those additional controls. And the last piece, and we'll see if we get to it, there's a great thing from the Department of Homeland Security that gets into this: basic monitoring. Knowing what simple questions to ask about your environment, where the data is, how you can capture it, and be notified when something is anomalous. Hopefully that wasn't too platitudey.
So I have to be careful how I answer this question because I could go for 30 minutes on this one. The answer to your question is everything that we ever needed to do when we were running utilities and making very informed capital-based, decisions as part of our asset management program. We've provided that as a software platform, as a guide. There's a reason why the software is called that. Full-on libraries, RCM kind of stuff, in order to provide the user and the clients everything they need to gather data, look at it properly, and make the right decisions. So it's facilitating that. One of the hardest things that I've come across, and our customers, and this is rife across the entire spectrum of the municipal organizations, is the quality of data, gathering the data, knowing what kind of assets you've got. I mean, if you're going to do any kind of asset management like the EPA says, you've got to, first of all, you've got to know what your assets are and what condition that they're in. And knowing your assets also means you have to know what the plate data is and all that other stuff. So I actually was in the field at Alex Renew and going like, gosh, this is really, really hard. And this is such a huge burden, and nobody seems to want to do this thing. So we actually address that problem so that if you can run a phone, you can now literally just click and take pictures of your assets, and our models will do everything for you. Plate data, the whole 9 yards. So we've eliminated that heavy lift. And this is one of the things about some of the technology out there and the optimizations on stuff. I think we should be using tech like the AI very carefully. We have an internal mantra called responsible AI. We keep it on a really, really short leash so that we don't get hallucinations and wacky data. And there are some software models out there that I call them like they're just like magic, but they're really expensive and they take boatloads of time to get trained up on this and that. So we know where we can leverage to lessen your burdens of time and materials and people in the field and that kind of stuff. So to answer your question is, yeah, we've directly attacked the asset management problem and the data acquisition problem. It is, having been on the other side of the fence in the field, whatever used to irritate me is kind of what we're pushing hard on.
Do you have anything to add, Lacey, on that one?
I guess I just, from your question, I got like, how do you implement the new with the old? And from a utility perspective, it's expensive. And, you have a project that is one scope. We had a site that we wanted to add a tank and booster pump station to, but we had a 15-year-old water treatment plant and a 30-year-old elevated tank. And they all had their own SCADA, and they all needed to talk to each other. So, at the end of the day, you can't just do your tank and booster pump station in a silo. You have to expand the scope and you have to take care of the rest. And it is just like, if anyone's renovated an old house, it just keeps going and going and going. And I think that's a hard part that like our utility finds is we want to upgrade one little thing. We want to do a bathroom remodel, but we want the heated floors in that bathroom. The next thing you know, you're tearing out your drywall because you can't get the right electrical power there.
That's an excellent analogy. I'm doing renos right now, so I feel it so hard. So I'll build on that a little bit. When you're dealing with, like all of these projects are multi-departmental, you're bringing in new technology, and these different departments or different stakeholders are going to have different priorities, different objectives, and also different tolerances to risk. So what are some of the strategies or approaches that you employed to align the discussion, to communicate across those silos and really bring everyone along at the same pace, on the same page to moving these discussions and the implementation forward when you were running into those types of difficult decisions or unforeseen challenges?
I think it's been said here earlier on this panel, but it's communication, it's bringing everyone in the room together, it's bringing operations, and it's bringing the actual foremen and supervisors, the people running the plant, not the really high up in operations, and it's asking them how they run it, how they want to run it, and then more like educating them on the technology out there, what we're thinking and why. And I guess I've found if you approach it that way and you get the field workers there in the room, it's more, they come to agreements on that their vision just isn't going to work, and they understand the reasoning why, then they really get on board, and they'll sell it to their frontline workers. And I really think you have to get that buy-in and take that time to educate people and have them there, show up and present. And honestly, it's as simple as bringing food, bringing lunch, and getting people to feel comfortable and talking.
Pizza party works every time. Yeah, so I guess any other concrete strategies or approaches that you experienced during these projects to get the gang together?
Well, I'll put my sales hat on for a moment. I mean, this is account management, understanding who owns what in the organization, the level of commitment, the stakeholders across various domains. It just gets super sloppy and messy if you're in there trying to pitch something and prove value, but the organization's not aligned. I know in larger enterprises that own multiple assets globally across geographies, it can get really tricky, especially if they look like a holding company, which means that each asset or site has its own budget. And while aspirationally the CISO for the organization wants to footprint a program across all these things, you've got a plant manager or VP of operations saying, yeah, I love it, find me budget and I'll buy it. So I think alignment, qualification, being really clear on the goals of the organization and their commitment is one thing. IT/OT, so I'll go to my security hat too. A lot of times IT, for very good reasons, sees good reason to implement security tools or controls into the OT environment. The charters of the two organizations couldn't be different, right? So I call it the Holy Trinity. On the OT side, it's safety, availability, and resilience, right? It's not data, personal information, those kind of things. And so from an OEM perspective, with an ABB process automation system, we end up seeing a lot of pressure from the IT side to bring in certain tools into the OT environment, which is fine, very noble aspiration. It's probably a great tool. But where it gets really tricky for us is we've designed and implemented a system that meets the needs of your asset's purpose, its operations, and we often stand behind that with a warranty and a service contract. Well, if all of a sudden you introduce a new technology and we haven't validated that, and going back to the operator's mandate of availability, resilience, and safety, we can't stand behind our warranty any longer. So it gets really contentious. We actually spend a lot of time selecting and trying to build consensus around what things should be brought in, how do we validate them, and how do we continue to provide warranty around that. So, because otherwise we're just accepting transference of risk.
I think the IT/OT, that's a whole other conversation topic for a whole other panel. We could definitely get deep into the weeds on that one with a lot of the people in this room, I think. We are at time because we started just a little bit late, but that's all right. But I do encourage you, if you have any questions for the panelists about the projects that they undertook, about their experience, how they got started, which technologies they used, what the outcomes were. These are some really fascinating projects, and I really encourage you to chat with our panelists at the coffee break that we have now. That's right. Thank you so much to our panelists. Please give them a round of applause.